How's everybody doing this morning? All right. Hey, you're all talking. That's great.
We need more coffee.
More coffee. I can't help with that. I don't drink the stuff.
You like concur? I know I don't like concur.
All right. I think they closed the door. It's time to get started. So this is lessons learned deploying Ansible automation platform in a hardened cloud environment. A couple quick notes. We're going to be talking specifically about V2. If you're familiar with Tower or AWX, I'm generally going to refer to those as V1. We also have some AWS-specific imagery in here. You could use this on Azure. You could use this on Google. You could use this on-prem. We specifically went with AWS because we were unable to use flexible Postgres servers in Azure Gov. Single server only goes up to 11.
Yeah. So if there's anybody from Microsoft in here, I want to have a conversation about that.
Yeah.
It's painful.
So if you are in Azure Gov, make sure you have that available before you start deploying. I think our regions just didn't have it. It's available in a couple of regions now.
Well, also depends on your cloud environment. Otherwise, you're going to end up rolling your own Postgres cluster, which who really wants to do that now?
Yeah, it sounds terrible. My name's Eric. I am a cloud and automation engineer at Collins Aerospace. I am the wonderful dad to an amazing 10-year-old little girl. About 6 years ago, she nicknamed me her Dadacorn, so that's kind of stuck. I'm also a Girl Scout volunteer. I love my little girl. We do all that stuff together. This year I picked up as her archery coach. The school archery coach left out and she'd been looking forward to that since kindergarten. Proud to say we went to nationals this year and ranked 200 out of about 1,000 teams, so it was pretty cool. I compete in strength sports. That's me over there pulling a fire truck. It was kind of fun. I'm also the old man on the team, and you'll find out that I have a lot of issues with the cloud. I like to yell at it. Abe Simpson's my favorite.
Yep. Hey everyone, I'm Trey. I'm really just some guy. This is Eric's presentation. I'm just here to keep things on track. But I too am a cloud and automation engineer at Collins. I primarily focus on the Kubernetes side of things. So you'll see me asking some really dumb questions in OpenShift sessions. Enjoy that. And I'm a fan of all things Ansible. It's been a long 6 years, but it's been fun. Don't know what I'd do without it, to be quite frank. And let's see here. That's really all I've got. My slide's kind of boring compared to Eric's.
All right, so who in here has ever heard of Collins Aerospace? We're a fairly new company, all things considered. A few hands, okay. So who is Collins Aerospace? I like to tell people we make everything that goes on the plane except the people and snacks. In truth, these are our 7 major divisions. Corporate made me use this instead of my fun slide. I'm probably not supposed to say that, but I did. So yeah, we make pieces and parts and everything that goes inside the airplane. Radars. We actually have sensors that go up on the Artemis rocket, and is it the Voyager probe?
Voyager missions.
Yeah. So we have all kinds of cool stuff out in outer space. We're outside of our galaxy. If you're a space nerd, go to collinsaerospace.com and check out the next-gen spacesuit. It is actually listed as the smallest spacecraft ever created. It's pretty cool. All right, so why this talk? Anybody go to Ansible Fest in October? Yeah, we got some hands? Okay. My singular goal at Ansible Fest was to learn as much about installing and configuring AEP v2 as I could. And unfortunately, a lot of the information was super high level, or I just heard a lot of things I really didn't want to hear. You can't install it onto a hardened system. It just won't work. It's too much effort. You're better off installing it and then hardening. You can't rerun your installer. It'll just break. Don't use an Ansible node to install on Ansible. Stuff like that. Didn't really like it. Didn't sit well with me because if you have to install it and then harden, you've got to make it work when it's hardened.
And to clarify here, hardened is STIG, SYS, FIPS, CMMC, the real fun ones.
So that's why we're having this talk today. So hopefully you guys can learn from my effort of putting all this information together. First up, last month, Ansible was STIG approved. Only the controller pieces, but it is now STIG approved as long as you meet these requirements. External identity and access management, DDoS protection, Postgres with TLS mode, RHEL 8 that is STIGged, and external log shipping. So great news for us that are in the DoD sectors. We are now STIG approved on Ansible controller. All right, so now into the fun stuff. I like to build from the outside in. So with AWS, I set up my security groups first. In the top left here on your side, yeah. standard ports, right? 443, we don't use HTTP, so we can't use 80. 22 between your controller nodes, and I always forget the Postgres port.
5432.
Yeah, 5432, thanks. You guys can see it up there. My screen's a lot smaller. So those are the basics you need for your controller ports. Now, your security is going to vary from mine. Mine are all in individual security groups. Hopefully yours are too, right? Reduce your blast radius as much as possible.
Then on this one, you can also configure your load balancer to redirect your HTTP to HTTPS if you don't want to just clip port 80 entirely.
And all those ports are configurable inside your inventory, right? We're not going to get too deep into the inventory. There's a few things I'm going to show you to watch out for. Now, in the bottom right-hand corner is your automation hub. Pretty similar ports, right? 443. I know I put 80 on the back end. I'm sorry, I forgot to change that. It should be 443. 22 again, and your Postgres. The big thing there that's going to be a little iffy is NFS, or EFS in the case of AWS on 2049. With it, we're going to talk a little bit more about clustering automation hub later, but you do need shared storage, so you'll have to set that up as well. And then the automation mesh. This is where all the magic happens, right? The load balancer to the controller, we've already talked about those ports. Execution nodes run on 27.199 by default. Again, that's completely customizable in your inventory. And then it connects out to your managed nodes over, 22, 5985, 5986, whatever you got. I see you guys taking pictures. I'm going to tell you I've got a QRC code at the end of this with links to everything you got, so just wait till the end and scan that. I got you hooked up because I hated that in October too. Yeah. Something new, right? So the hop node. The hop node's pretty cool. It uses the same ports as the automation node, but it kind of gives you some extra leeway. We're going to talk a little bit more about the hop node later too. The cool thing about all of this time is that 22 is only needed for installs, upgrades, and connecting to endpoints, right? So once you install Ansible, you can actually go in and disable port 22. You don't need it anymore. My security team really liked that. I haven't quite told my firewall team that because I don't want to have to put in a request every time I need to get it, so I've just disabled it in my security groups. And peering. So we talked a little bit about the hop node. We'll talk about peering some more, but peering is really cool. If you guys have segregated networks based on business units, you're a corporation and you've got multiple business lines, and you want to keep your automation separate, or you've got some labs and you don't want that mixing with production, peering is great. Go read about it. I'm not going to talk any more in depth about peering because it's everything you need to customize. There's not a whole lot of generic to it, but I highly recommend checking it out. So we got our network set up. Next is our database, right? If you're doing a private automation hub, I'm assuming if you have a hardened environment, you're going to need one. You're going to need two databases. Keys here are you do need Postgres. 12 is the minimum. We went with 14.6 because that's current GA in AWS. There's not really a whole lot to talk about here. To meet STIG, right, we talked about TLS. We highly recommend using your own keys. Don't use AWS keys. Use customer managed keys.
And rotate them.
Rotate them regularly. The key here is in your inventory, and I've got this a little bit later in a picture for you. The required mode, or the necessary mode for STIG compliance is require. There's a step above that, verify-full. A little bit of a performance hit, but there is a more secure option. STIG only requires that we set it to require. I threw this AWS image down here on the lower left side. That's all you need for your server name. Grab it from your inventory, for your inventory. And then if you hit that additional configuration option, you can go on ahead and set up your database name. If you don't do that, you'll have to connect to Postgres and configure the database later. Load balancers are short and sweet too. We've got controller here on the left-hand side. Default works great for it. Automation hub is a little different because it's a redirect. You have to update it to /UI. And set 301 and 302 as valid response codes. If not, your load balancer won't come online. It just won't work.
Yep. You fight that one for a little bit, but yeah. That's the answer.
That one was great. God, I hated that one. And I thought you could take 200 out, but you can't.
Makes sense.
So here's where the fun starts. Server nodes. How many do you need? How many do you want? Why do you want them? So we're going to start with controllers, right? Everybody knows controllers. That's what we had in V1. They run specifically project and inventory. They do not do execution. They are your automated tasks, your Git grabs, any type of cron jobs you set up.
API server runs there.
API server runs there, that kind of stuff. We're going to skip hybrid. We're going to go to our execution node. Did anybody run isolated nodes in V1? Yeah, we got a couple. Okay. So the execution node's kind of like your isolation node. All it does is execution. You go run a job, it runs it. It's great. And we're going to skip hop nodes. We're going to come back to those again. Automation hub. That's, if you don't have one now, that's your internal Galaxy server, right? It stores all your collections, any custom modules you write, pushes them out. So we're going to go back to hybrid nodes. Hybrid node is the default install option for control node. This allows it to be both an execution node and a controller node. I don't know about you guys. My security guys didn't like that when I told them that was an option. They want everything to be separated. I like it. Hop nodes. Anybody have low bandwidth sites? I talked to a guy at Ansible Fest that worked, I think, for Nora, and he had some in Alaska that were still running on a dial-up. Yeah, great. You need a hop node for high latency sites like that. Just be aware that if you have that, go on ahead and set it up. This is where peering comes back in. You peer that execution node to that hop node. Everything's good to go. So I have a pro tip down here for you. I said I didn't like that you couldn't run an installer from one of your Ansible nodes. I think I chased issues for 2 weeks before I said, you know what? I'm just going to deploy another server. And everything went away when I did that. If you can figure it out, let me know. I'd be happy to hear the solution, but I just had randomly weird issues when I ran my installer. So set up a tool server. You're going to need one to run Ansible Builder on anyways. That's just how I did it. All right, so this is something really cool in V2. This is not part of the installer, but I wanted to show you it since we were talking about the topology. Inside of the controller, there is a topology map. And it will show you your controllers, your execution nodes, your hop nodes. It looks like, to me, an old SolarWinds map, right? You'll see issues. You'll see CPU and memory constraints. You'll see network constraints. This image on the left is just a generic one I put together. The one on the right that I didn't get my mouse pointer out of is from the actual Ansible documentation of what this looks like. So you can see it's got all kinds of cool information for you. This is right where I said they told me you couldn't run the installer twice. I figured it out because what happens if you got a lot of red in there? You need new nodes, right? You need to expand. So anyways, great tool. Let you know if you have any issues after you deploy. If you need to choose more nodes, you need to rearrange your nodes.
And then the cool thing here is you can restrict what talks to what. So
Yes.
Here we have everything talking to everything in like a mesh type network, but you can restrict it so that it goes a certain way. Mesh is nice.
All right, so the fun, configuring server instances. This is where everybody told me they ran into all kinds of problems. And really, it wasn't that hard. Podman is the default for Ansible v2. You can use Docker. I'm not going to get into configuring Docker because I did not configure Docker, and I can't tell you how to do it. Podman's the default. It works fine. We haven't had any issues with it. Really, the only other thing you need to configure on your server is SSH access. With Podman, STIG level 1 requires that all unnecessary services be turned off. So by default, the max user namespaces is set to 0. You will need to change that. Podman can't run without it. You'll get an error out of space or unable to assign space or something that makes you think the disk is full, but it's not. It's your max user namespaces. All right, succeeding with the Ansible installer. You will have to make a change. You know, I was a Linux admin for 3 years before I knew you could exec out of temp. I always thought it was disabled by default. Fun story about me. Sometimes I'm a little stupid. So you have to go into the installer and comment out any of these paths that are non-executable in your environment. I was told go in and make them executable and then go back and make them unexecutable, and that just sounds silly to me. Why not just make it unexecutable when you run your installer? That's really the only thing I had to modify there. The inventory. This is where all the fun happens. So 3 main things in the inventory. Postgres SSL mode, set it to require.
Or
if you need to be
verify.
STIG compliant. Or verify, yeah. The receptor port for execution nodes, right? If you need to change it to 22, you can. If you need to change it to some random numbers for security, you can. Just highlighting that all these ports are in the inventory and you can change them to whatever you need to do.
Within reason. Don't go crazy.
Within reason. The other one, how many of you all do or will be deploying a private automation hub? Bunch of you, okay. So execution node or execution environments need a container repository. I'm not a fan of managing 6 systems when I only have to do 1, so Automation Hub is also my container repository. The only problem is whatever registry you put in here has to be available when you run the installer. So you have to run the installer twice. Run it, set up your Ansible, your Automation Hub. There's another line in here if you're doing a cluster. I should have copied it and I didn't, I'm sorry. To tell it what your Automation Hub URL is. If not, it'll use whatever the first server name is in your list of Automation Hub servers. So you'll throw your DNS entry in there that links out to your load balancer. But you'll have to run the installer, get Automation Hub set up, get everything configured, and then go back, update this entry, and rerun your installer. All right, so bonus, cluster and Automation Hub. This was really hard in V1 for some reason, and I never figured out why.
Impossible in V1.
It was impossible in V1. That's why I never figured it out. Yeah. So you need at least 2 instances, right? You have to have 2 to at least be a cluster. You need an NFS share for var pulp and var pulp core static. You'll also need a shared database. Pre-install, you have to configure your FS tab for your EFS or NFS instances. And then post-install, you actually have to go reconfigure them. And I really want somebody to explain to me what the difference is, because I don't know. But you have to change a whole bunch of the options for the var pulp mount. I meant to send that to Hugh and get that answered, but I never did. Hugh's back there. Oh, hey, look, I did include the Automation Hub main URL here. So yeah, that's where you would tag your main URL for Automation Hub in the inventory file when you set that up. All right, so post-install. We ran the installer. As I talked about, there's still a lot of things to do, right? We're not quite ready to do anything. If you have your Automation Hub cluster, I talked about you have to go back and update your FS tab. You have to update your services so that Automation Hub does not start until after your networking. Pretty easy stuff, nothing crazy. But the fun is execution environments.
These are your day 2 operations. So, you know, execution environments run out of containers. I personally think containers are great. My security team very well may disagree. My product owner may disagree. He's right here, so I got to mess with him. So there are some things that we can do to actually harden the container image. So we take the one that Red Hat gives us, and then you can make it STIG and FIPS compliant to meet the rest of your needs, and then just cram it right back into Automation Hub. But once that is done, we have to go through and install our, if you need the Terraform executable for your execution environment, then you need to make sure that gets on there. And we maintain a lot of different execution environments. There's, you know, general, the backwards compatible 2.9, because a lot of us are still using 2.9 modules. I know I sure am. And I guess the moral of the story here is harden your container images, because the ones that come with are not STIG compliant. Yep, very similar to Iron Bank, yeah.
So, like I said, Trey said you can do a whole lot with your containers. Ansible Builder is a cool tool. If you've who's never built a container? That's probably a good question. Sally? We got a few hands. Who's built a whole lot of them? Who's got this down to a pro? You don't even need Ansible Builder, right? Right. It generates the basic context files for you. Doesn't do a whole lot. It's basically a wrapper for podman commands. There is a way to tell it to use Docker as well. At the basic level, you need a base image, which Red Hat provides great base images. You need an execution environment.yaml, which tells it what that base image is. You also need a requirement.txt file and a requirements.yaml file. Both of those can be blank. Ansible Builder doesn't care as long as they're there. That will give you essentially your own copy of what Red Hat deployed. Even if that's what you're going to use, I highly recommend creating your own copy of a default base one, because who knows what Red Hat's going to change when they push out a new one. Just protect yourself so it doesn't break, right?
And you can take it a step further and actually sign your image once you're done, so you know it's yours. I don't now, Hugh, you might have to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't know if Automation Platform can do anything with signed container images yet. Still, makes you feel good. Satisfies that security box.
I know I've talked to a few people in here. How many people automate on Windows? Lots of hands going. All right, so you need this other block. Kerberos. We need Kerberos for Windows. The requirements for Kerberos are pretty simple. You need bindep.txt, which includes these two things to install. You need your krb5.conf, put it in your context directory. That's where it's going to look for it by default when you run Ansible Builder. And then in your prepend step, right, put copy for the krb5.conf file. You'll also need to install your crypto policies and update those.
And then if you are behind a proxy, you'll have to do those in your prepend steps as well. Forgot to mention that part.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll need your proxy info too. So that's the basics to get Windows working. Obviously, you'll need to add whatever custom Python modules you want to keep in your container. This is where it gets fun. By default, unless you do nothing, it will always look out to Galaxy for your stuff. I don't know about you all, but my security doesn't really want us looking out to Galaxy. That's why we have a private automation hub. To configure that, you have to add this to your Ansible CFG and put that in your execution environments.yaml. So essentially, you will see these same exact published, RH certified, and validated. I don't know why there's an equal sign at the end of that. I got to fix that. At the end of, or you'll see those as credentials in Ansible. Those are the different tags, labels?
Different categories.
Categories, that's the word, thank you. In Automation Hub. The kicker is the token. Because you don't get to see the default token, so you have to go generate a new one, which then means you have to go into Ansible and update all your tokens. But you need that token in here so that it can authenticate. And then throw that in there, rerun your container, and you will be working off of Automation Hub.
In Tower, if anyone is familiar with setting Galaxy credentials at the organization level, this is basically the next version of that.
Yeah, you have to do that too.
Oh, that's great.
Once you create your custom execution environments, I didn't put these screen caps in here, but you have to go into Tower, go into your execution environments options, and actually pull your new containers in. If you go into Automation Hub, it'll give you the link to everything. You just copy that, throw it in Automation Hub, give it a name, and you're ready to go. It's not really that hard. I could have included a screen cap, but it was like 8 steps, and I didn't want that many screen caps in there. All right. So that's the basics of getting Ansible to work in a hardened cloud environment. Anybody have any questions? Yeah, man, go ahead. Yeah.
So Red Hat, I'll take this one since it's containers. Red Hat UBI 8 provides minimal and micro, and then there's another UBI 8, right? And that's all the default execution environment is built on, right? So I believe you can get, yeah, you can. You can get the Docker file for, what's the Podman version of a Docker file? It's failing me. Container file, thank you. So you can go get your container file and then basically build yours from like, what is it, Docker.io, Red Hat UBI, UBI 8 micro, and then basically just build it yourself. So it never has to reach out to satellite. You've done everything in-house. Now, you still have to go out somewhere to get that initial, but.
Yeah. Yeah. If you download the offline installer for version 2.3, I know that it includes the initial containers as well, and you can copy those directly to your server from the installer directories. There's actually a Red Hat KB article for that for 2.3. I didn't have it in my sources, but if you look for copying containers to a disconnected environment, I think is what it was called, they have the steps in there to do it if the installer won't do it for you. But I do recommend running the 2.3 installer because 2.2 Automation Hub has a bug where it will not download from Galaxy. So any of your communities, in Automation Hub, you'd have to manually maintain. We had a couple other questions?
Sure.
Oh yeah, we have a microphone.
Great. Test. Okay, cool. You had talked about hardening your Podman containers. Do you have any resources on,
Iron Bank.
My experience with Podman containers is installing Ansible, so that is kind of it.
He's my container expert.
It'll be Iron Bank. That's
Iron
that's
Bank?
what I'd reference. It's an Air Force project where they are attempting to harden a series of containers, and they have to be STIG, SIS, FIPS compliant. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and recommend that you just go pull them from Iron Bank,
Sure.
but use it as a good reference.
Okay, thank you.
Use OSCAP Podman to do OpenSCAP scans of your containers too.
Yeah, we do that during our build process of our underlying base image, OSCAP, and then it dumps it into a directory. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Gentleman in the back,
We got a couple. One over here on the far side too.
back row. To
Back
your
row.
right.
I saw you cover the database TLS, and I might have missed it there. What about the STIG requirements for certificates for the web UI? And also, have you gone through importing the CA, sub-CAs into the container images as part of your operational procedures?
I'll take the container image one. So we do take our CA bundles and copy them into, what is it, Etsy, Anchor, CA, yeah. So we do copy our underlying PKI bundles into that, and that tends to work pretty well. Eric will take the,
As far as for your load balancers and things, the Ansible STIG document, I don't believe referenced them directly. We follow the defaults for whatever the load balancer we're using is. Whatever its STIG requirements are or its hardening requirements are is what we follow.
and then we bring our own TLS certs. We have an internal PKI.
Follow-up question, 1.3 TLS, is that enforced on the Postgres?
I think it's 1.2 right now, right?
1.2?
Yeah.
And on the NFS portion, is that NFS v4 with Kerberos?
So we use EFS, which uses its in AWS uses its IAM policy for authentication.
Got it.
I would imagine if you're using an on-prem one, yeah, you probably need Kerberos. I'd have to look back at the documentation. It wasn't one that applied to me. Yeah, man.
Is CRED SSP STIG compliant? Because that's a whole hell of a lot easier than using Kerberos.
I don't know. Hugh, do you know that one? It just says an external identity management, and then Kerberos for login. You know, it didn't talk about execution environment, just the controller. So
A lot easier for Windows.
okay.
Two commands in PowerShell and 3 things on Linux box when you're done.
Okay.
Yeah, Kerberos can be kind of painful.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Kind is an understatement.
Just install DAP. Where we use Ansible, make it less painful.
Yeah. No, that's a good question. We have always just used Kerberos, to be honest. All right. Hugh's got another one in mind.
I'm just curious what the purpose was for clustering Automation Hub. Are you guys pulling your EEs that often, or are you updating your EEs that often that would justify having HA Automation Hubs up at all times?
So we also use it for some custom modules, and any of our code cannot get out to the internet. So it has to be available every time an execution job is run, because it pulls a new version of the Git down every time. So if Automation Hub is down, our jobs will fail instantly.
And it's not so much the EEs as much as it is we also heavily use it for our collections.
Okay.
Because it's your galaxy.
Right.
Right, yeah. Yeah, we don't have the option to default back to Galaxy.
The EEs get built on a monthly cadence by policy, and then they can get pushed out, on updates.
Yeah, yeah. Our jobs only pull the EE if there's an update or it's unavailable or it's not, not already there. So no, we don't pull the EEs that often, but we do store a lot of custom collections out there. We do have like I said, that's the only option for us to get collections from. So it has to be available for it to work.
And to get ahead of the question that I'm thinking we might get, we don't really have any experience with signing the Ansible code yet, because that's still relatively new to us. But I'm very interested in that one.
Kind of to hop off what he said, have you guys experienced any, I don't want to say reliability issues with Hub, but like, have you, in the vein of why are you clustering it? do you do anything to make sure that your hub is healthy, and is there any kind of monitoring that you do there? My company's run into a couple of like weird token issues. Sometimes pulling EEs, like it'll just stop, so we have to bounce it. And then like, I was just wondering if you've set up any kind of
No,
I have that same support ticket open.
504 gateway. Ah.
there is, now we kind of cheesed it a little bit. So what we have is, surprise, surprise, an Ansible job that runs on a schedule, more like a cron job, and just goes out and smacks Automation Hub.
Yeah.
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 And then, you know, you do one at a time, so then one's up. But
Yeah.
we like to call it moderately available.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
I have a few questions. The first one is, how are you managing your containers? So, for example, you start off, you build an image, and then a month later, someone needs an additional package included, right? What are you doing to make sure you don't have images just kind of laying around? Like,
Your answer is CI/CD pipelines.
okay.
So we store in, we have a Git repo. I don't know if I'm allowed to say the technology. Am I allowed to say?
Matt will shut you up.
So we have a Git repo, and then that's where our the execution environment .yaml file lives, and then bin dep and requirements YAML and requirements.txt, and then whenever one of those is updated, it goes through a process of PRs, and then once it's merged into main, that triggers a pipeline which rebuilds and releases the new image.
So it's just one with multiple versions?
Yeah, so we maintain a 2.9 legacy image and then a current version image.
And
But also to your point, if it's a random one-off, if it's not built into the image, it'll just look back to Automation Hub for it.
Okay.
So we those random one-off, you know, somebody from the network team wants to configure a single F5, you know, we'll pull F5's modules down to Automation Hub instead of baking them into the image. Really, because you want your container to be small for security purposes anyways, right? Only bake your cores into there. You know, I mean, we do maintain a Kubernetes image too, because I didn't want that in our core.
Also going to argue that we have some instances where, like, let's say I'm trying to deploy the security stack on a server sitting in Indonesia. You know, that's pretty dang far away, and at some point physics kind of comes into play with moving data, right? So we have a couple of really big execution environments that have those installers in them so that the copy to that server happens local from the execution environment itself. So that's the exception.
Yeah, there's a lot of ways you can tackle it, but if it's in between builds, you just throw it in Automation Hub, and as long as you configured your Ansible CFG file, it'll look back to Automation Hub to find it.
Got it. The other question is Postgres. So in Ansible Tower, you couldn't do database replication because of the version. You guys doing anything with Postgres internal replication? Anyone in this room? Because what we've run into with Ansible Tower is if you have two different, say, data centers, right? That means they're very separate, and you have to do this manual failover. But if you have the ability to do that replication between databases, then you just need to fail over the execution node and controller, but the database is always in sync. So if anyone has a strategy on
Now, I'm going to lean on Hugh a little bit for this one, but I do believe that we don't do it today. So I believe that Red Hat provides an architecture for a highly available automation controller with replicated databases. Okay.
Yeah, we're doing something similar to that, where we have an active database in East and we have a standby database in West. We're using normal Postgres replication to do that. We actually have our controller nodes deployed into both regions, and they're active, but we disable the secondary region's controller nodes because they're slow, because they're trying to hit the database server in the other region. So during a failover, we have to promote the standby database, and then we just have to update the database config file in the controller nodes. All the execution nodes are in both regions as well, and they're active because they don't need to hit the database. I would not necessarily say it's the best solution, but the last time we did a failover, it was 20, 35 minutes, and most of the data is there. So it so far has worked for us, but I would love to have active Postgres and have both regions always on.
Hey, Hugh, we're up here. This is Hugh, our Red Hat TAM. He's doing a fantastic job helping us out.
Everybody give Hugh a round of applause. He makes a great Vanna White.
I just want to pick up off that Postgres thing. We're in Azure, and we use ASR to replicate the controllers to our secondary region, and then their Postgres flexible databases allow you to replicate that secondary over to another region, and then it has a read-write listener in front of it, so you never have to adjust DNS, and you press one button to fail over the entire Postgres database, and another one button to fail over your controllers, and it's like a 5-minute failover.
Okay.
All through cloud, right?
I know that, I mean, we replicate between like 1A and 1B and 1C or whatever they call them too.
Well, no, you're right, we're Gov, so you Gov 1. My apologies, Eric.
Are you doing anything to handle the statically set credentials admin with the static password and the Postgres account?
So that is a policy requirement for us that those passwords rotate on a certain basis, and that is what we like to call manually automated, and that we just go do it.
That's why you have to be able to run the installer more than once. That's what really bugged me about everybody saying you couldn't run it on an unhardened machine, because I have to. I have to be able to do it in 90 days.
There's no real automated way for us to currently do it. At some point, we do intend on looking into that, but right now I don't want to say it's easy to just go manually do it, but that's where we're at.
There's when you look at your inventory file, there's a change password or update password field. Just set it to yes and change your password. It's the easy way.
I have a question about using the platform to manage, I guess, separate accounts in AWS, and what the best way is to send those automations out, whether it's kind of direct SSH or if there's, if you just load the automation controller from the different account, or what is basically the most secure way to do that?
As far as managing EC2s, like you want to deploy to an endpoint?
Yeah, sending out configurations to nodes in different secure separate environments, essentially.
So the bane of my existence is Windows EC2 instances. I have yet to figure out how to get through my bastion to them. For Linux, doing a hop through your bastion's not that hard. SSM also has the option to run an Ansible playbook. You can store it on an S3 bucket or a public GitHub. If anybody has an answer to that, I'd love to hear it, because that's typically how we do it. Yeah.
We use Session Manager to do it.
Yeah.
And an Ansible credential that's basically just a giant AWS profile of all our accounts.
Yeah. Session Manager is great if you have it between all your accounts, and I think you can store them in a universal S3 bucket that every account can hit, right? I told you AWS and me, we don't get along. I cuss at it daily. But yeah, I mean, or like I said, if you have a GitHub repo that can be publicly accessible, even if it's a private GitHub, as long as it's on the internet, it can get to it. Now, if you have a corporate GitHub, I have that request open with AWS to make that allowable somehow, but we'll see how that works out. So yeah, that's typically how we do it, is either through SSM or if you can hit it through a Bastion type of host. What's the best way? My security guy's right here. What's the best way?
I'm not a security guy.
Session Manager's great, but it's not the most secure thing in the world, because it kind of just has programmatic access. So through the Bastion logs, who did what, so that's probably the better way. But
So the Sessions Manager, you can send all those to CloudWatch. That's an interesting question. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a little bit to unpack. We can talk a little bit more about that when we're done if you want, because there's a few other ideas, but those are the two main. If it's Linux, we just hit it straight through the Bastion typically. CloudWatch and SSM are great tools where they're available and you have it configured.
Now, to expand on that, when we say we're going through the Bastion, are we going from controller through the Bastion to an execution node to the EC2s?
No, so we're essentially using the Bastion as a jump host, right? Like you would set up your Bastion SSH session into your EC2 instance. We do not have execution nodes out in individual accounts yet. There's a few that have requested it. We just haven't done it yet. Anything else? I think we're closing in on time here.
Yeah, we're coming up on, what, do we have 11:45 or 11:40?
11:45.
All right, so we got 5 minutes. Before you guys leave, there's a thing that they told me I have to read to you, so.
We have any more questions? Oh, yeah. There you go. Thank you. I'm glad you said that. I forgot. Made it easy for you.
So this is mostly for me. We have to end on time, and then I'm supposed to ask you guys to clean up after yourselves. It says it on the paper here, so.
Get your stuff and get out. If you guys see us or you have another question, flag us down. We're happy to chat. Trey loves this stuff. I think he eats it for breakfast.
I will talk your head off about Ansible or Kubernetes or really anything. So if you see me, ask me some questions.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for coming. Dude, that